Alright guys, let's go to round 6. So in this game, I was playing against I am Balaji Dagubati, who I believe is still a junior. I think he's something like 18, 19 years old. He grew up in the Bay Area, has always been very, very talented. And so far in this tournament, actually, he had been crushing it. If I'm not mistaken, I think he had like 4.5 out of 5 points. Or maybe even 5 out of 5. Like, he was doing great. At this point, I'm on 2.5 out of 5. And somewhat disappointed because I didn't win that last game against Udasin that I felt like I had very good chances. So for this game, I decided to go knight f3. And yeah, I'm really actually wanting to win this one. Balaji also beat me in the previous Norm event that I played back in March that had like a very similar format. In that game, he was white and ended up winning. So I definitely wanted to take my revenge. And for this one, I decided to go with something I play every once in a while, aka the E3 poison setup. And yeah, there's a couple things that made me want to play this one against Balaji. The main one was that I saw he already had a number of games against this system, and he had been sticking to kind of like one or two setups very very consistently, like playing with e6 and b6 frequently, or sometimes playing with like knight f6 and e6. But I kind of felt like this was a good choice because I have some experience in these positions, and to me it felt like he wasn't always super comfortable. So he ends up playing one of his usual systems with b6 here. And of course, okay, black has a million different ways to play here, and it's all very, very solid. The main idea for white, just kind of from a philosophical point of view, is that we're trying to essentially build a pretty normal setup with like b3, bishop b2, eventually d4. We're just trying to avoid certain structures and trying to get some kind of playable middle game structure, something like playing against an isolated queen pawn or playing against the hanging pawns, something where white can kind of be a little bit better structurally long term and kind of play for that type of advantage. So there's different ways the game can go here. Here black plays b6, I go b3, bishop b7, bishop b2, knight d7, and here I went for g3. Now, generally, this is a big no-no. You're usually not supposed to combine e3 and g3 and e6 and g6 together because you're just opening up too many squares on one color, and your bishop can't cover all of these squares. So this is a very important rule, and I would say in 99% of cases it probably applies. Like if you go e3, you shouldn't be going g3 and vice versa. Here, though, in this exact position and in some similar positions like in these setups, it actually does kind of make sense. I mean, it's temporarily ugly, but the bishop does go to g2 where it is now stronger. Black hasn't been given a chance to take space with d4, which is what often happens, right? So if, for example, I was to just play like g3 here and the game were to follow like a similar character, let's say something like this, and then we go c4, let's say bishop b7, castles. At a certain point, black's just going to go d4 and just take a bunch of space, and it's not really going to work out for white. So that's why this move e3 is kind of needed. And yeah, essentially the bishop just ends up being better on g2 than it is on e2. And just to kind of show the idea behind the setup, let's say black were to just kind of develop normally here. Let's say castles, castles, and say knight c3, for example. Black goes c5, and then white were to take and go d4. Here we reach kind of like a very normal position where the pawn on e3 is absolutely useful for white because it's helping us defend the d4 square. And if black ever goes cd4, we're of course taking with the piece, playing against the isolated queen pawn, and the bishop on g2 is placed perfectly. So this is kind of white's dream for this like double fianchetto setup, is to eventually get one of these nice d4 structures where both bishops are doing well. Of course, black has other options along the way, as does white. Actually, I played some games with a setup going d3 and queen to e2, And I think that's actually a very, very interesting setup for white, when white is able to actually slowly kind of build up and get a pretty strong kingside attack with like knight h4 and f4 and g4, and very, very classic stuff, but very, very fun to play. So yeah, I know David was criticizing this one quite a bit, or he criticizes whenever he sees it, but yeah, it does actually kind of make sense once you start looking at it move by move. So here black ends up going knight c5, which is kind of a surprising move, but does make a lot of sense, because immediately black is actually threatening to take on c4 and go knight d3 check, which is kind of an annoying threat. I thought for a while and ended up playing d4, which I think is maybe the most natural move, which does allow the knight to come into e4, but white is able to keep developing here as well. The critical move was probably b4, which I didn't really consider too much here, but the main point is that if the knight, let's say, jumps into e4, white can take on d5, let's say black recaptures, and white gives this check, and this is just kind of annoying for black. And in fact, structurally, I think white is doing great. We have like the c-file in the long run. We can always kick this knight with d3. The bishop can go to g2. And yeah, I would say white is doing pretty well here. Like queen d7, we trade and we go knight e5. And yeah, I think this is quite nice. There's also a trick here. If c6, then there's this move bishop a6, which is very annoying for black. Because the idea is that if takes, then we're taking this one. If king e7, I think it's b5 here. And yeah, it's really, really dangerous for black. So this is kind of a nice one. But in general, I think this is already kind of a fun structure for white to play. Because black has other options. Can go knight d7 as well, which is more solid. But then I think white is just going to be a little bit better in this position with the open c-file, extra center pawn, and so on. So yeah, b4 I didn't really consider this one during the game, but I ended up making use of this later because I had this in some blitz games, and then I had a chance to use this move. So that was kind of cool. Here I went d4, knight e4, knight c3, black develops, bishop g2, and white is basically just a little bit too slow here. If I had one extra tempo to castle, then I think my position would be great. But here I'm actually not quite fast enough, because black takes, goes knight e4, and I'm not in time to just bring my bishop back because there is bishop b4 check still, which is kind of annoying. There are some positions, like d4, c4 positions where white just ignores it and puts the king on e2 and is absolutely fine. But usually in those positions, the bishop is on d3 and it's much better placed. The king is safer. Here I'm like definitely weak on this diagonal, and this would not be a fun position for white to play. So I didn't want to allow this check, and end up just deciding to go queen to c2 here. And it was kind of a shame to give up the bishop pair, but I also felt like strategically I'm very, very solid here, and I have this fantastic bishop on g2. If a pair of minor pieces ever gets traded off, then I felt like, my knight would be better than either bishop, or my bishop would be better than either bishop. So I kind of felt like strategically white is still doing quite fine here. So takes, bishop d5. Black had other options as well, but I can kind of understand taking. Otherwise, white is ready to castle, go knight e5, and is going to have some nice pressure, maybe even f4 somewhere. So takes, bishop d5. I throw in this check. I feel like this was pretty annoying. Queen d7 is not so comfortable for black because I can take, I can go knight e5 check, and then I can take here and put a rook on the c-file, and already feels like white is achieving something. So c6. And now I bring the queen back to d3, and my idea was, well, I'm threatening e4 to possibly trap the bishop. Here black does get bishop b4 check. I played king f1. King e2 I think was maybe a little bit more logical so that the rook can get in. In fact, I think I would rather play this move. I played king f1 to actually just defend the bishop, because my idea was to go knight e5 immediately. Currently I'm threatening e4, so black goes f5 as expected. And now after knight e5, I just wanted the bishop defended so I can immediately hop in. But the problem that happens in the game is that black just castles. And actually I don't have such a great way to force the trade, like force black to take and allow me to develop my king. So that's why I think king e2 here would probably just better. So then I can go rook d1 and then king f1 and then knight e5, and then okay, it doesn't matter to me whether black takes or not because my rook is developed. So this was, I think, a little bit inaccurate. So anyway, knight e5 castles. I go rook to c1 here. I'm just trying to put some pressure to again force black to relieve the tension, but he just goes rook to c8, which I think was a very, very smart move. And yeah, now it's like still not clear like what white should be doing. I can play bishop f3, but it feels kind of slow. I end up taking on d5, and I was mainly expecting queen takes d5, where the idea was to go back king e2, but probably this wasn't right. I think I can still play a move like h4, even h5. I actually don't really have to do anything right away. Maybe even bishop f3, king g2 at some point. I think I can still keep the tension, and it's about equal. Maybe white is having some chances as well, because black's issue is that like the structure is kind of hanging on because of this light square bishop, but if the bishop ever gets traded, then a lot of the pawns start to become weak. Anyway, I took on d5, and yeah, I was definitely expecting queen takes d5. I spent a lot of time trying to figure this out, where okay, hitting the rook, I would probably go king to e2, and then after c5, my idea would be to play queen to c4 and just force the queens off the board. I wasn't exactly sure how to evaluate this position, but I felt like it's not super simple for black here, and I felt like only white can really be playing for something. Especially if the queens come off, then it just feels like black has a few more weaknesses that they have to deal with. Objectively, the engine says it's okay, but I think it suggests this move, for example, which is a very tactical and not an easy move to play, by the way, because you're allowing white to take on c8. White can also take on d5 and play for this endgame, and yeah, it's not so clear that black is doing all right here. But yeah, actually in the game, Balaji ends up playing c takes d5, which is very, very surprising. And I didn't get a chance to ask him why exactly he rejected this one. Because to me, this just felt way more logical, just opening up the queen and playing for c5. But I don't know, c takes d5 is very surprising for me because now this allows me to just totally fix my king. Black is able to challenge for the c-file and fixes one of his weaknesses, but the e6 pawn remains a very serious weakness here. And it's kind of well known because now we transpose to a Stonewall Dutch all of a sudden. It's kind of a structure we weren't really expecting. But in the Stonewall, generally black does not want this like open c-file where their e-pawn is super weak. If there's going to be an exchange on d5, generally black wants to be able to take with this pawn. Of course, here that wasn't really possible because c6 is weak, but okay, usually in the Stonewall, there's like a bishop on b7 or something that can keep it defended. So yeah, cd5 was very surprising because now it just felt like white is quite comfortably better. Black played bishop a3 here. I didn't think too much on this one. I just ended up playing rook takes c8 and trying to infiltrate with my queen and just playing for some positional pressure, maybe trying to get the c-file and some pressure and so on. I actually had a chance to play a very strong move rook c6, which good old Stockfish pointed out, and I considered this move, but I really didn't understand the follow-up. But the point is to, of course, keep the c-file, but the tactical point is that if black takes and goes queen to c7, then white's idea is not like queen b5 or trying to hold on because the knight is not really going to be able to stay here. But actually to go after the bishop, either queen a6 or b4 might be the most accurate. Which I just didn't even look this far, but it's kind of a cool idea. Queen takes c6, queen takes a3. It looks like everything is equal, but actually I'm hitting the a pawn and I'm threatening to take over the c-file. So white is getting some advantage here for sure, because black has to defend the pawn or give up the c-file, or keep the c-file and give up the pawn, and there's no kind of like perfect defense here for black. Say something like this, rook c1, and then okay, white can just put some pressure, b5, queen b4, queen d6, a4, and definitely rook c6 not an easy position for black to hold. So this would have already created, actually, I think some nice winning chances, but okay, yeah, I didn't look far enough to find this b4 idea. So I decided to trade queen to b5, bishop d6, knight d3, just bringing the knight back so I can take over the c-file, queen b7, and here I decided to go knight f4, which definitely wasn't the only move. I felt like on rook c1, black was probably going to go rook c8, and I didn't really see how to make any significant progress here. But with knight f4, I thought it's actually kind of a good question, because I'm targeting e6. I'm asking whether black wants to defend this pawn passively, like with something like king f7, or whether black is going to take the knight on f4 and then allow me to take ef. And after some thought, black does decide to take this one. And of course, I wasn't sure how good this is for white, but I just felt like I can just put pressure here and play for 2 results. So definitely can't be such a bad position. You know, we can double up on the e-file, rook e3, queen e2, then start playing on the king side, like h4, h5, maybe looking for some g4 somewhere. And yeah, I mean, honestly, during the game, I felt like probably black should be holding with best play. But I also felt like there's a perfectly reasonable chance that my opponent might start making mistakes and not hold it and give me some chances. So I went for it. Here black played rook c8, rook e1, king f7, queen e2. And already king f7 actually was a little bit surprising, because it feels like, you know, the king is coming out. Now queen e2 targets this pawn, as well as possibly hinting at queen h5 check. But queen d7, there's no real threat yet. With queen h5, the king just goes back to g8. So h4, I just start kind of poking around. Queen d6, a4. And of course, the big thing to understand in these heavy piece endgames is that it's really all about the safety of the kings. So I'm basically just trying to open up both flanks. I want to go a5 at some point and just open up lines on the queen side, so that my pieces always have rooms to try to get in. And yeah, if, like, for example, the a-file opens up, then maybe I can start targeting the 7th rank, and of course black has weaknesses here. And I also want to play on the h-file. So a4, and then here black goes g6, which honestly was very, very surprising, because it just gives white a very simple hook with h5, a hook that I didn't have on the previous move. And I guess black was just really annoyed by this queen h5 possibility on every move and wanted to just kind of rule it out. But yeah, I think g6 just comes with much bigger drawbacks, because now white just gets h5, I can put the rook on h1, and then I'm always threatening either to open the h-file and try to infiltrate, or in many cases I could put the pawn on h6 as well, and then black has to worry about any kind of infiltration long term. So if the queen or rook ever gets in on the 7th rank with the pawn on h6, it's basically just going to be terrible for the black king. So definitely that felt like a mistake during the game. I felt like maybe h6 is the move to play here, so that queen h5 check, you don't have to worry about the pawn so much. But even here, I was looking at this a bit. Queen h5, let's say king f8, rook e5. White can definitely continue to put pressure, and here I'm just going to play for g4 and maybe break with f5 somewhere. And yeah, really not so easy anymore for black to hold this one. But yeah, after g6, I felt like now I should really have good chances here. Rook c3. I played rook h1, so I'm not worried about the b pawn at all. If black takes this one, I think I just have like a simple move queen to c2 here, and then the queen is infiltrating, and I think it's essentially just hopeless for black because I have threats of hg and bringing the rook in. Queen h8 is also kind of a devastating threat, and black is just yeah, no chance of defending here with hg coming. So the pieces are just too misplaced, and king is too open. So rook h1, and I'm just keeping the tension here because honestly I hadn't decided yet whether I do want to go hg or h6, and I felt like the threat is probably stronger than either one right away if I don't see anything obvious. So king g7, covering some squares on the h-file. And now I played a5, so I kind of liked what I did here, you know, h5, now a5, and just principle of two weaknesses there, just playing on both sides of the board, trying to open up the A file so that my queen or rook can get in on this way, but of course I want to keep the H file open as well, because at some point I might try to sneak in like queen F1, queen G1, queen H2, and try to get in this way. A5 definitely wasn't the only move here. I think queen B5 is perfectly reasonable as well. B4 also is an idea, because queen takes B4 runs into all kinds of stuff here. And yeah, essentially I think white is already very close to winning. But it was tough and actually messed us up quite a bit from here. So A5 takes queen B5. Now my main threat is to just come in with queen to E8 and then take on G6, and basically it's going to be mate. So black goes rook to C8, defending against the back rank. And now for some reason I play queen B7 check, which was really bizarre, because my original idea was to just take the pawn back, just win the pawn back, equal material, or now equalize the material, and this one is a target. Black can of course try to hang on to stuff with A6, but the queen side is slowly opening up, and eventually there's just going to be too many lanes to cover for white's pieces. So maybe I can even go like B4 here and look for B5, and again I'm just trying to infiltrate, and yeah, it's very, very unpleasant for black. Of course, I always have H6 or HG possible, and yeah, really hard for black to find a decent setup here. So I played this check, and then black goes queen to C7, and I think my idea was that I wanted to go like queen A6 here, hitting this one, and keeping an eye on the rook. Then I realized black is just going to go rook E8 and not actually getting in right away. So I play queen B5, hoping for black to repeat the position, because that's where my queen came from. And at this point, Balaji is definitely approaching time trouble, so he's, of course, I think would be happy with the draw. But he's smart. He doesn't repeat. He goes rook B8. He doesn't give me a second chance to take this pawn. I wasn't worried about it, but it felt kind of silly. Like, why didn't I just take the pawn back immediately? Anyway, queen E2. White is still doing great here, just because there's still too many weaknesses for black to defend. Here, black played king F6, and I went for rook E1, just putting more pressure here. I actually missed a chance that some players found while they were watching the game. For this trick, takes, and rook H7. Very surprising. I don't think I had this one on my radar at all during the game. But the point is, after queen takes H7, otherwise queen A5 is mate in 2. White gets queen E5 with check. King has to go back to F7, and then queen C7 with check. And so white is taking everything with check. Takes on A7, and then we end up in this queen endgame, which I think is not too hard to judge as winning for white, because white's king is still very safe. Black has a ton of weaknesses. Black's king is definitely even still more exposed. And of course the B pawn is incredibly strong here. And so this would be a very, very difficult position for black to try and defend. Like queen can just sit on C5, push the pawn up to B6, queen C7. It's like the position just kind of plays itself. So that was a miss, I think, because I think that was a very, very clear win, and definitely something that I could have found. But somehow, yeah, I just wasn't connecting with these ideas during the game. So I go rook E1, rook B6. Then I drop back rook H1, just kind of still maneuvering around. King to G7. Now I played queen E1 here, going after the A5 pawn once again, trying to snag it. Rook C6, he doesn't let me. And here I decide to go HG, HG, and rook H4. Finally, I decided it's time to commit. Let's open the H file so that I always have this idea of queen H1 and coming in with rook H7 or rook H8. And yeah, this one is quite difficult for black to deal with. So he goes queen to B8, and this allows me to finally snag the A pawn. So I grab this one. Of course, queen takes B3 just lets white in immediately and win the game here. Just way too many threats. So queen B6, queen A3, looking for queen E7, rook C7. There is a question in case of rook C1. Yeah, if rook C1, then E6 pawn is hanging. So white just comes in, and this is the problem. Like black's pieces have no threats, and as soon as white gets in, it's always always just terrible for the black king. So rook was kind of tied down to this one. Then we got to take, queen a3, rook c7. Here I play back queen a1. Again, the idea is to go queen h1, so if queen takes here, queen h1. And black is not in time to stop this attack. King f6 or something, we can go like rook h8, and then the queen comes in via h4. So again, just too many weaknesses around the king, and it just felt like during the game, at this point we're both kind of approaching time trouble. Maybe probably I was up on time here, but I think black had something like 3-4 minutes, or almost playing on the increment. But yeah, very difficult position to defend because white just has so many different ideas. So Balaji ends up playing rook to c2 here. The only defense I think at this point was king to g8, which is kind of a hard move to find. But the idea is that if white does play queen h1 at this point, then black has queen takes d4, and actually all the entry squares are covered. And black did take a very important pawn, and not to mention starts to get counterplay with queen e4 check. So it's, yeah, very important for white not to lose this pawn too quickly, because then black starts to get counterplay and can change the direction of the game. So instead here I would have to keep maneuvering, maybe something like rook h1, trying to bring the rook to e1. Also I can look for maybe some ideas of queen g1, queen h2 if I can make it work. So it continues to be a maneuvering game, but it's one of those things where on every turn black has like 3-4 ways to go wrong, maybe 1 or 2 moves that are solid, and over time it's just very, very hard to find the right defensive move over and over again. That's why like a lot of times these positions just end up lost. Yeah, here Balaji plays rook c2, which I think is a losing move. His idea was to meet queen h1 with queen takes d4 like this, and even though I get rook h7 check after king g8, there's actually no follow-up, and of course black has a bunch of threats of their own now. But I simply wait on the threat. I go queen to d1, hitting the rook, and hitting this one as well. And now black plays rook a2. At this point I thought rook c3 was the only try, where now white can go queen h1, because queen takes d4 only comes with this queen e4 threat, so black is no longer hitting f2. So here white can go rook h7 check, king g8, and queen h6. And so this is actually now very, very dangerous for the king. If queen e4, that's just one check, the king just slides over, and then white has way too many threats here, queen g6, queen g7, etc. Now it's not over yet. After queen f6, there's no like immediate mate here, which is kind of surprising, but white just takes on a7 and is just totally dominating. Black can go rook c8 and cover the back rank, and I think I stopped around here, but I just kind of assumed white should be winning this position. I mean, there's no mate yet, like queen h7, king f8, everything is covered, but we have this b pawn, and I didn't really calculate to see like, okay, b4, d4, like what's happening here, but I kind of assumed if the b pawn is running, then it should be winning. And it makes sense. I mean, both of black's pieces are kind of tied down to defending against all these mate threats, so there's no way they can deal with like a passed b pawn as well. So this was black's best try, but still probably losing. After queen d1, if queen takes b3, then I do switch to this queen h1 idea, and the point is black doesn't have enough time to generate counterplay, and rook h7 is coming once again. So black is just getting mated here. So black ends up going rook a2, so that queen h1, he can still go queen takes d4, and then I wouldn't have time for this rook h7, queen h6, because f2 pawn would be hanging with check. But now I get queen c1. So now if queen takes d4, I can immediately come in and give mate with checks with queen c7. So for example, if here there's queen to d8, and then if king g7, there's always queen h8. If king f7, there's rook h7. So the king is just not surviving. And if black doesn't take, well, then I'm threatening to go queen c8 in one move. And then when black takes, of course, there's queen h8 and rook h7 at the end. So queen c1 basically, I think, is just ending the game. Black has no way to stop both queen c8 and queen h1. Like if queen b7, for example, then I'm going queen h1 back, and black has no way of getting, because they can't go queen takes d4, so no way to defend. So black tried rook to e2, and I play queen to c8. There's basically one line I had to calculate here, which is what I'm doing after rook takes f2, where black starts to play for a perpetual. Now if white takes this one, then after queen takes d4, it's actually difficult to see how white gets out. And I think it is a perpetual, like queen e4, and then queen e2, and yeah, I don't think I'm escaping the checks. But it's always very important to remember when your opponent does one of these kamikaze sacrifices, sometimes you gotta just ignore it, and that can end the counterplay much faster. And this is one of the cases here. In fact, in our last game, I was the one that was like trying this desperate sacrifice, and then he was the one like avoiding it and just winning smoothly. And here it's just over because queen h8 is kind of an unstoppable threat. Black can give the rook with rook h2, but after king takes h2, there's no more checks. So he resigned here as, yeah, the counterplay has officially run out, and yeah, just queen h8 is coming next move. So yeah, that was the end. Definitely not a perfect game by any means. I think I made a lot of mistakes in this one, but I was reasonably happy. I mean, it's not easy to kind of grind down a strong player from a position that's like, slightly better for white, but not that much, right, in computer terms. But yeah, I was reasonably happy with my technique here and how I was able to kind of put pressure. Maybe against a much stronger player, they would have held it, but yeah, I felt like I played decent enough.